Welcome to Brunch with Billionaires with your host, Tamara Lur, Forbes' top 11 most powerful leaders.
Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Brunch with Billionaires. I'm your host, Tamara Lur, and today we have on the program a dear friend, Jim Sorenson, who is not only a billionaire, but an entrepreneur and innovator that is using his genius to seek real change to communities across the world, not only in the United States. Now, Jim has built upon the impressive legacy of his father, the late James Lefroy Sorenson. Now, he has and holds more than 60 patents and is an innovator of an array of different medical inventions, forging his own career in the digital and tech fields. In the digital compression software development field, Jim and his team were amongst the world leaders. In fact, they were working on video compression technology that powered Apple's QuickTime video player. He also produced an affordable video phone supporting deaf and hard of hearing individuals as they communicate using American Sign Language. Since 2012, Jim has headed the Sorenson Impact Foundation, a much needed organization that specializes in providing grants and other forms of funding to startups that are really disrupting markets at home and abroad. Outside of simply being disruptive and innovative, the companies Jim and his foundation work with are directly focused on making a difference for some of the most underserved communities around the globe. These are companies and organizations that are fostering sustainable growth and laying the groundwork for a more positive and beneficial business and investment landscape for tomorrow. Now, this idea of sustainable growth is what makes Jim such a fascinating person to chat with today, and is one of the reasons why we were so keen to have him on the podcast. Jim shows us through all the actions and how he shows up every day that with the right approach and ethos, it is possible to generate serious revenue whilst keeping that all-important ethical focus, making the world a better place. Today, Jim and I are going to talk about all things sustainable and innovation, and also look at what impact investing really is and the landscape around it, and examine how businesses can target positive growth and best practices for the future. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jim. How are you today?
Good. Happy to be able to be part of your podcast. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. I was hoping we were sitting down to have brunch together, but my travel plans changed, so I appreciate you accommodating the virtual. Now, we've already given some background to our audience around your career and what you are as an investor, what your mission is. So talk me through your journey. I mean, this is Brunch with Billionaires. I mean, how did you reach this fabled $1 billion mark?
I think I have probably a similar journey to many that are on your podcast series, Tamara. I think the last 20 years may be a little different, but the first part of my career was really as a serial entrepreneur. I came from a very entrepreneurial family. My father was a well-known pioneer in the biomedical space, and he was a great example and mentor, and very successful, kind of a rags to riches story. In fact, if he were alive, he'd be a great one for you to interview. My mother was, I would say, somewhat the opposite. She was not business oriented, or didn't have a lot of what I say classical business sense. She was an entrepreneur, but more socially. And her love was really, she had a very empathetic heart to begin with. So she was always helping people, but her real love was in children, arts, and education. And so she ended up developing a program that integrated arts back into elementary ed because it had been stripped out because of funding issues, and it's since scaled throughout the state. So now art is used to teach the core subjects in the state through her program. So I had that kind of a background, and I started either running businesses or founding businesses. I'd love to bring in new ideas, create teams, and products or services and businesses that would succeed, and then ultimately sell them and kind of move on. And it was in the process of doing that. And this was, about 20 years ago when I had an interesting company that we'd invested a lot of money in. It was at the time of a great convergence of technologies with, broadband conversion and the internet and everything else. And we were focused on a video conferencing system for the mass market. And we saw a real opportunity and had developed, I think, a pretty good solution and went out into the marketplace. We're raising money and got a great term sheet. The next day, the dot-com bubble burst hit. This was in 2002. And, everybody just went away. It was a time when, valuations fell by 70, 80, sometimes even 90% on some of these companies, and no one was interested in investing in us. And it was at that juncture, and I had a decision to make. We were burning through, cash, and what do I do? People weren't interested in our solution or investing. And I'd hired a deaf brother-in-law about 2 or 3 years earlier, mainly because he couldn't get a job. And I thought there might be a market in the deaf. They're very visually oriented. And he came to me with a new service that was being essentially trialed, a video relay service. And that's a service that enables the deaf to communicate with the hearing through a remote sign language interpreter. So this is a sign language interpreter in another place, and to do this all virtually in real time. And, we had a much better solution than anyone else because we'd invested in this. And even though we were competing against AT&T and the big telcos, we essentially captured the market and grew dramatically in this little niche market, and I think later then, within 3 years, less than 3 years, became really what was the largest private equity transaction. Very profitable business, and did really well, grew extremely fast. A very large transaction, and we sold the company. And along the way, I had a kind of a profound realization when I was being referred to as the Alexander Graham Bell of the deaf, that you could address a social problem or benefit society in a much more scalable, self-sustaining way through a business solution. And that really put me on the path to what I've been doing over the last 20 years, which is really focusing on impact investing. It hadn't been coined at the time, but I guess I was an impact investor with Sorenson Communications. But, my path has really led me to try and really build an ecosystem to engage others to invest for, a double bottom line return as opposed to just a single bottom line return. Doing good while doing well.
I love that.
That's a very long answer to your question. You wanted the journey.
I love the journey.
I'd lay it out for you, Tamara.
I think that's really important. And, I love to hear that, that's your mother, really, you have your mother's heart, which is beautiful. And I grew up with a deaf cousin. So I know sign language, and, nothing really stopped her. So, Australian sign language, right. It's different than the American sign language. But her mother was, my auntie, who was really the only woman in our family who was entrepreneurial. Even though she was a school teacher, she was always, she was the principal, and she was always helping in the community and really for business. And she told my deaf cousin, Kylie is her name, that she can do anything. So she went on to be the first teacher to be teaching both deaf and hearing, and she was completely deaf. So what was great about that is, she was able to lead by example, that you can do anything regardless. So I love that you were in that space, and I'm sure that she and her friends were using your technology. And it's really about that communication. So it's interesting you talk about this whole impact investing title, because for me, doing good, it was just always a necessity, right? I grew up fundraising, and that's how I got into business, because I was fundraising, and you basically come up with creative ways to make money with very little. So I went, oh, this is quite entrepreneurial. Maybe I should run a business. So doing that philanthropic work is a great way to transition into business and then automatically bring the two together. But for a lot of people that I meet, they feel like sustainability, giving back, it's a destination, whereas I try and explain that it is a journey. We do as well as we can until we know better, and we make sure that impact is embedded, and just being purpose driven is embedded in everything that I do, and that we do it along the way, as opposed to a lot of people I'm sure you've met say, when I make this amount of money, I will give back. What's your thoughts and your advice to entrepreneurs who are listening around how to stand for impact and be responsible from an early stage, as opposed to putting this off for the future when I get to that destination?
Right. Well, I think, what you're describing really is kind of evolving. And I would say my parents, particularly my father, had, the philosophy that you made money over here and you gave it away over here, that they didn't mix, so to speak. But my grandchildren think differently. They want to be doing things that reflect their values, and that is not only in their careers or in their work, but it's also in investment decisions. So we're seeing really, I think, a shift where that thinking is becoming more commonplace. It's one of the reasons why impact investing, sustainable investing, now represents about a third of the assets under management in one shape or another, and has grown so dramatically over the past 20 years, and will continue to grow as we see a huge wealth transfer from my generation, so to speak, to the next generation. My son, actually, both my sons are now. They've left their careers. They had great opportunities, but they want to be doing what I'm doing, and we're setting up an asset management group within what we're calling the Sorenson Impact Group. The asset management will really establish new funds, and in very underserved or innovative sectors of impact. One of them being disability, by the way, because there's 1.5 billion people that have some form of disability, yet there isn't a fund addressing it. So it's a ripe market. It's a multi-trillion-dollar market, and nobody's focused on it. And yet the technologies, the businesses out there are really compelling, very successful opportunities for investing around disability. And the entrepreneurs like was it your aunt that was deaf?
My cousin.
Your cousin. There are many in the that have disability that are very entrepreneurial because they have a lived experience. So inventions like the typewriter, like the telephone, like the internet, these all have seeds in disability. So it's a ripe market, and part of what we're doing is really creating more products for investors to be able to choose from in expressing how they want to invest in their values, and looking for those that are overlooked and particularly innovative. So I think my journey in the last 20 years has been to try and help build an ecosystem to educate, to advocate in policy, and help facilitate impact investing.
And I love that you're leading the charge on that. Long before impact investing was really coined, to be honest. And for so long it was seen as either a handout, as you call it, or not for profit and for business at the same time, and they can coexist. And I agree that, stakeholders and shareholders are now looking for more transparency, more purpose-driven businesses that they can invest in, and they're voting with every dollar. But the other thing that everyone keeps forgetting is, we have this workforce issue. And in order to attract companies to come and work for you, this new generation isn't driven by purely money alone. They really want to work for companies that stand for something and that do have impact at its core and purpose at its core. So, you don't have a business without people. I mean, everybody's always talking about the person, Elon Musk or whoever it is, they put that person up. But behind that person is those who help build it. You would know this. I always say to my mentees, you can get to 1 million, maybe 10 million on your own. But past that, there's no such thing as, making it on your own or, a solo entrepreneur. You are the people that you put around you and that take that journey. So I love that you're looking in the space of innovation because the disabled community is part of the billions of people who have been forgotten. And I had the pleasure of meeting your fund manager, who's just a standout woman. And she was telling me, the amount of opportunity there is, yet there's some of the most unemployed people on the planet. So, we've got the staff shortage over here and everyone in YPO is complaining about how they can't find staff. But then we've got all these capable, innovative, do so much with so little sitting over here that we're not tapping into. So how do you see that we can be a little bit more conscious in our decisions around how we attract the people to our companies? How do we attract that innovation and create an ecosystem where that can thrive?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot has happened in the last 2 years with COVID that I think has created really an awareness, and businesses have learned to work remotely, and we have seen and have invested in the Enable Fund, the Disability Fund, in analogs to LinkedIn, which are basically, instead of screening those with disability out, screening them in and helping prepare them for participation in the workforce. And I think there are companies now that are really hungry for workers that can come in and work remotely. And there's a great opportunity, and we've been able to tap into that through some of the investments that we've made to address really, I think, one of the pillars in that fund, which is workforce development and access to good jobs for those that have disabilities. We have another company that focuses on autism, which is its own form of disability. And there are qualities with those people that have autism that can really be harnessed in the right kind of business environment and work opportunity. And so the company that we invested in really is expert at being able to prepare those with autism for these kind of opportunities and then match them. So I think it's really a big part of this is innovative, thinking different, and looking at the market as an opportunity as opposed to a barrier. And that's the way we see this great opportunity with disabilities.
Well, you would know in our entrepreneurial circles how many have shared their story about being, having autism as a kid and now being, a superpower of theirs as an entrepreneur. So I love that, that conversation is shifting as well. Now, you mentioned your sons are in the business and you're coming on to 10 years. Tell us a little bit about your fund and your mandate. You've mentioned a couple of projects that are that you're working on that I think are so necessary and will probably create some amazing ways of doing business that is more innovative into the future. So what other things are you looking for? What do you have a mandate? Is there a particular area that you're focusing on into the future with this slant of innovation? And is there a sustainability part to that? Because we've got obviously we've spoken a lot about the S in ESG, but what about the other two?
Yeah, I would say, to give you kind of a bigger picture of what we're doing, because it's fairly comprehensive. What I have built over the last 20 years, I have a foundation that's focused on impact investing, which has become 100% mission aligned. That means the corpus is invested in sustainability, as well as we're making program related investments, which are considered grants. Though that side of it is often concessionary, it's helping to de-risk very early stage companies. But because we're underwriting them as an investment, it's much more thorough, much more rigorous than a grant would be. And, we've had amazing results there. And then on the endowment side, we're invested in all of the 17 sustainable development goals that the UN set. And we're beating the benchmarks. So in other words, we're getting better financial performance across asset classes. So that's the foundation. I endowed the Sorenson Impact Center, which is at the University of Utah, that gives students an experiential education in impact investing. And they do everything from, market research and helping to underwrite and source deals for third parties that they're working for, to data science, measurement, impact, performance, improving the performance, and then field building and storytelling. So that is part of the Sorenson Impact Group, along with the foundation, and then the asset management. I've talked about Enable Ventures. We started another fund focused on impact real estate. How can we utilize real estate to generate market rate returns alongside impact? And the themes there are affordability, their economic development, their access to services. They are, inclusion and environmental and sustainability. So these investments will address those various themes, but through real estate. I think the final part of the Sorenson Impact Group is our advisory services, where we can help others that have a similar mind, that would like to do what we're doing, achieve a market rate return, or address a philanthropic interest in a more scalable, self-sustaining way through impact investing. We can help them in their path. So again, what we're trying to do is build an ecosystem to facilitate, impact investing, as well as educate the next generation and help them in career paths into the space.
I love that. And I think something that you touched on is that that measurement and tracking against the UN SDGs, and full transparency as well. No longer is there the investor who is there's a faceless fund, as I call it. We need to be tracking this. We need to be showing the work that we're doing, and having that transparency around everything that we do, which is really important. So, when it comes to, I love the housing part as well. I'm working on a couple of projects that are really utilizing how do we bring entrepreneurship and affordable housing and communities together, because I really believe it comes down to creating communities of like-minded people at every level, because when we have a sense of belonging, we can then really grow. And I've seen that in YPO now with, we turn over 9 trillion in America alone. And, we're starting to see these coming together of impact driven businesses and investors and sharing their wins, which is really wonderful to see. So thank you for being part of that conversation and leading that direction, because you've visioned this a lot longer than the rest of us. So it's wonderful to have a role model in that way. So now talk to me about data. Now, data analytics, automation, artificial intelligence, they're all things that I embrace, I harness in my businesses, and leverage, and I really encourage my mentees to do the same, because this is becoming a really important tool for businesses of all sizes, to be able to bring into their businesses to drive success. So, what is your take on the data play and this constant technology constantly evolving at this pace? What advice do you give to small businesses and those that are listening that are trying to figure out how to harness these digital tools to drive their success?
Well, I think when it comes to data, and I think it's one of the areas that really needs to improve in with impact investing. I think that there's some confusion around the number of frameworks and the way people see it differently. Generally, what we try to do is embed it fairly early on in the businesses that we invest in. I mean, how correlated is the dollar to the impact? And if you can measure it and build it in at that early stage, then it becomes easier to measure over time and track over time. I think we try to keep it simple, but also make it meaningful. And I think it's important that there's materiality to it. Sometimes you can't measure everything that matters, and everything that matters can't be measured. So you have to be really looking at what's material to the performance in the business as well as the impact. I think our strategies around impact measurement really begin very early on in embedding them in the culture in the business itself.
Yeah, well, it's seen as quite a niche. People are saying that impact investing is a niche, but as we go into what they're calling this decline, is it a luxury being sustainable? Is this something that we can't afford to do, or is it something that we need to afford to do? Because there's a very big divide I'm seeing. I can say this as an outsider, in America, between this whole it's greenwashing versus it's a necessity. And when you throw in the economic climate moving forward, people are kind of seeing it as a bit of a niche or a luxury. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're seeing in the U.S. right now a well-coordinated anti-ESG movement. It's become politicized, which is really too bad, because frankly, what you're doing in ESG is simply taking more data into consideration in making a more informed decision and mitigating risk, and in the long term, making better investments. And this has been borne out in a number of studies, Tamara, in terms of investments that have been invested with an ESG lens, and how they've informed how those funds have performed versus those that haven't. And in the long term, where you're taking climate risks into your consideration, and there's real risks as we see every day around the world. We're seeing an increase in natural disasters. This is floods, droughts, all kinds of storm-related, weather-related issues, increasing at the pace of about 5x over the last 50 years. These all create risks that have to be essentially taken into account as we make better decisions, as we're prudent. And I think there's a real concern about some of the treasurers in the states, particularly red states. I hate to say it because it's become politicized, that they don't want these risk factors included in their bond ratings because they're likely to affect their bond ratings. So it's a sensitive issue. But if I'm an investor and I'm investing in something and I want to make the best informed decision, I want to take all of the data into consideration when making that decision. And that's what really sustainable investing is doing. And over the long term, it'll bear out in outperforming those that don't take into account those risks.
And I mean, when you look at it, the top 3,000 companies are doing $2 trillion worth of damage to the environment every year. And, that's something that you and I probably won't be around to try and fix, but we're not getting to net positive. And you bring up an interesting point. I believe, and there is data that shows that impact investing does get a better return. So I think it's important that we educate people on that and make that more known. But for leaders who are listening, they're kind of in a hard place because they're having to stand for something and almost get involved in what's seen as politics. So what would you say to leaders who want to stand for impact, who want to, stand for ESGs and do their part, yet are being, coming across, this sort of, pushback as a leader? I mean, it's always been our job to stand up and lead, but this in particular seems quite sensitive. So what is your advice to the leaders out there that are impact and purpose driven?
Well, I think that there are many leaders not only in government but in business. Larry Fink, for example, is taking a lot of heat right now. BlackRock, trillions, the largest fund manager, and they have funds that are managed for ESG and others that are not. I mean, they're that large, but he has really made the case about what we call stakeholder capitalism, and that is looking at the whole picture, not just shareholder, and how it makes for better investing. And he's weathered that, and I think you have to have leaders that are willing to stand by principle. And there's a lot of disinformation, at least here in the U.S., about what ESG is. And I think education is really important because people, when they really understand it and understand that it's simply taking risks into consideration when you're making these investments, I can't see how you can be against that. The other side would call it, you'd have to call it risk washing, because you don't want to take risks because of some political reason, or you don't want to consider risk because of some political reason. It may affect your own performance, so to speak.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the more of us who get together and work on this and have these conversations as a group, the better. And it's interesting, the perception of people with money. We're all meant to be sitting around, on our boats and our yachts having drinks, and it's quite the opposite. We're coming together and actually talking about the billions of people who are invisible, who are being left behind, and that gap is getting bigger. It's not getting any closer. And I really do believe to my core that businesses will solve these problems, not governments. So, another one is Paul Polman from Unilever. I love his latest book, A Net Positive. And, looking at it as, we're not trying to go from here down, bring this down to zero. We actually want to look at it this way and actually go from down below, come to net positive, and then go beyond. And I think that's something that you've always had intrinsically in you, in your DNA, in your genius, in your purpose, is that, we go beyond. And I want to thank you for representing and continuing to, you could be retired, but you're not. And I don't know what retirement would look like for both of us. It would, I think we drive everybody insane.
Right.
But thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to share this time and my thoughts with you, Tamara, and hopefully we can do it in person sometime, either in Australia or in Utah.
Oh, I love that. Both beautiful parts of the world. And it's not maybe, it's a definite. I think the universe has its plans. While I love virtual, I'm still an old school in person
Yes.
We will have brunch soon. And thank you so much. Really, this is for me about showcasing, the people who might be known as billionaires that are really not interested in showing up in the flashy cars and running around town and doing all those crazy things. We really need to show the leaders with money who are doing the right thing, because money isn't a bad thing. It's not that, we have to look at people with money as those that are greedy, but instead shift that perception for those that are listening around what money can do to help others. And really, money is just energy. And how do we create a more positive give back energy on this planet? And because we can't take it with us. So thank you for setting this path for us.
And I would say the billion that I'm looking forward to reaching, or reaching 1 billion people through impact investing and the work that we're doing. We're at about 600 million people now. So, we've a little ways to go. We measure those that we're impacting. We want to get to 1 billion.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am here and happy to help in any way. I love the vision. Thank you so much for your time. And I can't wait to see you in Utah.